As the burgeoning video game industry began spinning its platformer focus away from Super Mario Bros., many innovators would introduce new mechanical concepts to intertwine with the typical platforming objective. No more would the heroes simply run in one direction and jump over pits and foes. They would be equipped with weapons, be asked to complete a variety of objectives, shift gameplay styles entirely, or more closely mimic a human's capability throughout their adventures. Groundbreaking titles like Prince of Persia would lead the charge in trying to blur the line between a video game challenge and a physical challenge, as the main character would have to utilize their body to gain momentum for longer jumps and climb up tall ledges. Imitators flocked to this new platforming subgenre, and in 1987, the Eternal Castle would be quietly released for low-end hardware. Over 20 years later, the game has been resurrected by a small team and updated to run in widescreen with new audio effects and slightly improved animations. Despite these changes, the Eternal Castle is still very much a game with its feet firmly planted in the past, and its gameplay kept exactly the same. Like Prince of Persia, the Eternal Castle asks the player to navigate its adventure with a character whose controls reflect human capability. When standing still, the character cannot jump especially high, but will reach upward and climb up ledges if the opportunity is present. Clearing large gaps is possible with adequate momentum, and throwing the character from high ledges without being ready to roll will leave them face down on the ground. Building momentum while running is an automatic process, and the player must be aware that slowing down to stop or turn around isn't instant. The character can also crouch low to pass under low ceilings, or hide behind cover. Rolling is also initiated from a crouch. The player has a plethora of movement options to utilize, and the sense of momentum gained when running through an escape sequence is fantastic. There are also a number of combat encounters for the player to tackle. Unarmed, the character has a 3-punch combination, as well as a leg sweep to trip opponents. They can also pick up weapons, ranging from hammers and hatchets to automatic rifles and shotguns. Most of the enemies are humans, who occasionally wield these weapons, but there are also dogs and some supernatural creatures to contend with. The human enemies often provide fun, highly chaotic boxing scenarios, where the player has to battle a crew of up to 8 opponents at once. The dogs are much too fast to fight, and the ghouls aren't damageable without a firearm. Larger, boss enemies are also present at the end of most levels in the Eternal Castle. The Pyramid level seems to be a Central or Southern American city, and is capped with a battle with a masked shaman. This battle is more visually entertaining than mechanically engaging, but the shaman is capable of calling in allies to fight. The Chateau level houses the ghoul creatures and their creator, a scientist who turns himself into a monster when the player arrives. His mechanical, reanimated wife is the real target here, and unfortunately, the monster isn't particularly aware of its surroundings. The tower level ends in a chase sequence. Upon reaching the end of the level, a helicopter appears from behind the buildings and chases the player across the rooftops. This isn't especially difficult, but it does end in a surprisingly brutal way. Then, in the lead up to the game's conclusion, is a giant hand robot battle that looks incredible, and while unoriginal, is a decent challenge with the Eternal Castle's controls. Finally, an encounter with an android that must be reprogrammed to defeat. The puzzle mechanic of a spinning maze must have been the first of its kind, and it sits well with the incredible presentation of the battle. Low-end computer hardware was rather limited with regards to palette, but the Eternal Castle takes that limitation and makes it look like a voluntary style. Color graphics adapters, or CGAs, were only capable of displaying black, white, and a single shade of magenta and cyan. Rarely, the magenta and cyan would be replaced with red, green, and yellow, and the remaster pays a tidy homage to this in a couple of places. Previously, I took issue with Other Side's limited palette, and while the Eternal Castle's palette wasn't limited for stylistic purposes, it suffers similarly from poor readability. The player character and human enemies are silhouettes with similar proportions, so it can be easy to lose yourself in a crowd and some areas heavily use black in the backgrounds, which can cause enemies and the player to entirely vanish. The art is excellent when it is visible though, and the rotoscoped animations are so smooth and fit the gameplay style so perfectly. I believe some of the movies are 3D animations with a filter to appear like the rest of the game, and while they look amazing, it would have been delightful to have the original animations available to view somewhere. The sounds are great though. Compressed screaming and vomiting aren't sounds I expected to find charming, but they really are. And there are music tracks that blew me away, especially the song at the game's conclusion. Text in the game is barely readable, but from what I was able to decipher, the events of the Eternal Castle occur post-human inhabitation of Earth. The planet has been pillaged to near death, so those who could have evacuated to orbit or recolonization expeditions to other planets. There are still caches of resources on Earth, and androids are occasionally launched to retrieve them. These androids are not expendable, so when one goes missing, the player is sent to Earth to retrieve it. Upon entering the atmosphere, the player's ship is shot out of the sky and crashes to the ground. The player ejects and must make their way back to the crashed ship. Once back, the ship has lost 3 necessary energy cores, but is still functional enough to teleport the player to near where the cores landed. After the cores are returned, the player can then fly to where the android had last been heard from, reprogram her, and return to orbit. Serviceable, but more than enough to contextualize the gameplay, and generally on par with the game's contemporaries. There aren't too many remasters of games from '87, and many of the primary candidates have opted for reboots or continuations instead of reviving the original game. The thing that makes the Eternal Castle stand out is that it didn't release in 1987. There was never an original game. The remaster is the first instance of this game's existence. The Eternal Castle is far outside the realm of capability for developers in the late 80s, and the art is a pretty glaring clue to confirm this. Unfortunately, I believe the developers weren't confident that a game with just over 2 hours of gameplay would be able to stand as a product without excusing this flaw as a symptom of age. They were wrong if they truly did think this. Although the length is depressingly short, what is here is unbelievable. The artistic value is astronomical, and there is no wasted time whatsoever. The game could have certainly been padded out to meet whatever standard a video game is supposed to. But if that filler is worthless, then it only serves to destroy the excellence already within this game. So, the Eternal Castle isn't what it claims to be. Instead, it offers much more than was possible at the time it claims to have been created. The lessons learned from that era have served to make the Eternal Castle a fantastic resurrection of 2D platformers' most ambitious gameplay shift. The return to the CGA graphic style, handled as exquisitely as the Eternal Castle has, clearly created an undeniable identity for this project. I hope that this venture has assisted the creators in whatever their next projects are, and would absolutely enjoy another attempt at a video game. For now, only time will tell, and it could be eternity. Next, fairy tale creatures will assist in the investigation of a missing person in a village that holds the door to the netherworld and is haunted by the spectre of death.